Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. This week, we are going to be talking about the finale of The Mandalorian Season 3. This was Season 3, Episode 8, Chapter 24, The Return. We're going to give you guys our full spoiler thoughts on this episode in the rest of the video. But before we do so, of course, make sure you're hitting that like button, you're subscribing to the channel, and you're commenting below letting us know your thoughts on this episode. Of course, as we do with every finale episode, we will be giving you guys a score for the season as a whole, and we will be talking a bit about Mandalorian Season 3 in general. So if you want to give us your thoughts about the entirety of the season, now's your time to do so. We've seen every episode. We know what the plot was. We're going to structure this review first. We're going to talk about the episode and what we thought of the finale here, and then we're going to move into our overall thoughts on Season 3 and give you guys a rating out of 5. So, Sanak, what did you think overall of this episode? It wasn't necessarily the crazy reveal episode that a lot of people thought it might be. We didn't get a Thrawn. We didn't get any more Shadow Council. We didn't really get that face-to-face we thought we might get with Din and Moff Gideon. This was an all-out action episode. Some of the best, most satisfying Mandalorian action I've ever seen, but also yeah, there are some plot elements, but we definitely skipped out on.
I think that last point you made is probably a pretty strong summary of this episode and like the feel and the vibe of it, and also good solid chunks of the season as well. For me, I really did enjoy this season finale. I want to say it is the most exciting finale in large chunks. It's not the best paced one, even though this one was like a 38-minute or something length, and which is actually about the same as last season's finale. That one felt a lot better paced, even though all of that was just one episode, because 7 isn't really more than just a staging ground episode. That felt so much more paced out, and it's because it's also just a lot smaller of a location. This whole season has had incredible visuals. Just seeing all the Mandalorians flying and fighting against those Imperial armored troopers. I think that's the actual name for them. Like all that stuff was insane. Gideon fighting in Praetorian guards again. The action, the direction of it, well paced, well shot, beautiful looking. It's the story that I guess there isn't really much here, but it just happens just a second quicker or like a minute quicker than I'd like. Like immediately doesn't have that face-to-face confrontation. He never takes off his helmet, and I wish we got to at least continue that trend of each season finale having him take off his helmet here. And look, this is Star Wars. We've always had like stuff that just happens. Like Luke has some unspecified amount of time training on Dagobah, and then he's able to fight Vader pretty well. It's like you can kind of live with that in Star Wars. It's just I don't know. Some things it just happened there, and for me, the biggest thing that just happened was Gideon's clones that we'd already kind of seen a tease of, seeing that they're clones of him, explaining like, hey, that's why he thinks the Dark Troopers next evolution by having a human in them would be better. It's because well, they're him, and then you immediately see Din just click some buttons and he just like floods them, self-destructs them, and then Gideon immediately explains like, "Hey, why'd you ruin this for me? Like I was about to figure out how so close to implanting the Force into these characters and have like Force sensitive Gideon clones to be even better than me." And it's like, Gideon, that was pretty big. Why wasn't that like a little bit more of a tease in the moments that we had before? It's a little frustrating in that sense. Another thing too is that Dark Saber is just destroyed. I expected the handle to be Beskar. If it's not, sure, whatever. It's kind of done, and now Bo-Katan is just the leader without any of that like ruining, I guess, the conflict between the Children of the Watch, the Night Owls, and the survivors. You could have just taken moments throughout this episode, added 5 to 6 minutes, including that scene, to just have people talk, confront each other, deal with the consequences, set up things better. And then, yeah, this would have been a very strong finale for me. Right now, it just sits at very good. It just kind of gives you like a footnote, like a Cliff's note of what was very exciting to see happen. And then it's like, oh, all right, well, let's move to the next scene.
Very, very accurate, and it's the first thing I wrote down in my notes when we see the run time before the episode starts, you see 41 minutes, which includes the incredibly long credits, and then, of course, the first 2 minutes of intro and recap. In typical Mandalorian fashion, when things are less strong in the story department, it's always because these episodes are too short. And if we just added a little bit of time to it, this would have been a phenomenal capper to the entire season. A lot of what I wrote down in my notes was quite positive though, because there are some phenomenal sequences in this episode. Particularly, Moff Gideon is finally the powerful bad guy that I've personally always wanted him to see him be. To see him actually stand on his own 2 feet and really be a powerful force in combat, even with the explanation of Bo-Katan giving him the dark saber and him not necessarily being better than her to win it. Still, it was nice to see this guy who has been the big bad of this show for 3 seasons finally get some actual physical power. So I really did dig that. Just shots like Bo-Katan and all the Mandalorians charging, and she pulls out the dark saber and like points it at the bad guys and just goes in. Like that is so cool. There were so many awesome moments. Again, I love this being a Din heavy episode. We haven't seen that throughout the whole season. It's been a bit more of a Bo-Katan season, which personally I've been completely fine with because I've watched all the other stuff. Bo-Katan is kind of the Mandalorian that we know from canon. I do like to see her story continue, but Din has been a smaller part of the season, and it was nice to see things happen. But like you said, a first note I wrote, Grogu saving Din was so random. Like, where did he come from? The rest of the Mandalorians are all running away, and Grogu just shows up. We don't necessarily like zoom in on him escaping through the hole that Bo cuts. You would assume that there's no way for him to get back to Din. He doesn't have a jetpack. How did he get there? Also, Din escaping that quickly was also quite disappointing, but it set the tone for this episode is going to really have very little explanation for why things happen. It's just going to have things happen. And most of them are going to lead to incredibly beautiful action sequences with some phenomenal looking CGI. The Mandalorians flying down from space through the clouds, and then immediately after they fly through, you get that still shot, and then the TIE fighters come through, like gorgeous shots like that. Unfortunately, there just isn't that much substance to pack underneath it. It's a lot of stuff that's carried through all 3 seasons, but doesn't necessarily feel like it was built on for this season. Like Moff Gideon, if he's actually dead at the end of the season, the weight of that is because of season 1 and 2, not necessarily because of season 3. Like you said, the clones dying, also wrote down as being something super quick. I didn't know what Din does. We don't even know what happens there. I thought maybe he released them all, or maybe Din was pressing a couple buttons and then like a fail safe kicked in and they were all going to come out and he was going to have to fight like 20 Moff Gideons. Those were things that were going through my head. And then Moff Gideon just walks up and he's like, "Hey, you, why'd you do this?" So stuff like that is disappointing. I think when I personally have sat with this episode and thought about the plot points of it visually, and when I rewatch it again tomorrow, there are a lot of amazing things about this, and I'm looking forward to the future here of The Mandalorian as we return to kind of its episodic roots, as we return back to like this experimental Star Wars Western that Jon Favreau wanted it to be, I think, from the beginning. At the same time, since this has been the flagship show of not just Star Wars, but Disney Plus, it is a bit more disappointing when we skip through things that we have the time to do. Like this was not a 50-minute episode that we're like, dang, we just need one more episode. This was a 35-minute episode that could have been 50 and would have felt a bit more satisfying. Let's talk about season 3 though, because I hinted at it there. There are a lot of things about season 3 that were really, really good. A lot of Mandalorian centric things that work quite well. There are other things that feel a little more ham-fisted into the season. There are other plot points that feel kind of random as well. Sanak, what were your overall thoughts on season 3, and what would you give this season in a score out of 5?
I'm a little bit more positive on the season than others that I've talked to. I think when we look back at this and give it like a binge, maybe this will sit a little bit more strongly than it has at this point in time. Like you said, all the things with the Mandalorians as a people worked well for me. The dark saber feels a lot more potent storytelling wise in the end of season 2 and the episodes in the Book of Boba Fett than it ever felt here. Does ultimately make the dark saber in this season feel like, okay, it's just a thing instead of something so significant. Like you should feel the weight of it every time it's drawn out there. And just the transfer was still kind of weak because we don't really get that conflict between Bo-Katan and Din. That even if it's not really like them fighting, it could be like a dispute of like their lifestyles, what they're doing with it, why they need it, why one doesn't need it, stuff like that. It's things like that with the iconography of Mandalorian culture that just feels weaker. The people are great, the survivors, the idea of the clans uniting, setting aside the differences, and Bo-Katan. I loved her in the season. This is the best she's ever been. Katie Sackhoff truly delivered here, better than anything in the Clone Wars for me, better than her short appearances in Rebels. That's where I struggle with the season because what's there with the story is quite good. It just needs a few more minutes here and there and spread out over the episodes. Mandalorian should focus on the Mandalorian, Din Djarin. It's not. That's okay. It definitely is affected by real world stuff with Pedro Pascal. But I don't know. It's like if the trade off here is that I get to see some of the greatest dogfights, the greatest visuals of Star Wars ever, and this season kind of comes off as a transitional season. That's okay for me. If I really try to condense that into a score, I feel like I also have to give the context for what my season 1 and season 2 would be. Season 1, I think people overrate a little bit. For me, I think it's like barely a 3.5. It's quite good in the first 3 episodes and the last 2. The middle stuff is just kind of there and all the payoff comes in season 2. Season 2 for me is a very solid 4 as time has gone on. Understand more of the cameo criticisms, even if it does serve as a story. So for me, this season is like a 3.75. Structurally, not the greatest. Plot wise, kind of stretched thin and just kind of haphazard and needs a few minutes in each episode. But there's too many good things about the season. Great payoff for all the 3 seasons to end it off as like a phase 1. I think as time goes on and Ahsoka in season 4 and Book of Boba Fett season 2 comes out, this will stand stronger because a lot of the stuff that doesn't feel immediately necessary will have payoff.
Looking back at season 3, for me, season 3 is a lot of both jumbled ideas, but also the lack of a cohesive narrative throughout the entire season is one of those things that by the time you get to the end, you see the plot points that are there, you see what they're going for, and you're like, that can work. And I can think of 20 ways to connect that. If only, if only we could connect it in hindsight, we can make it work. And of course, storytelling is extremely hard. That's why none of us are writing The Mandalorian. But it's also one of those things that when you can see the threads, it becomes even more frustrating across the entire season when they don't connect. So I think that was certainly disappointing. And, looking across the entire season, and I think a lot of the disappointment of this season does stem from the fact that this is Disney Plus's flagship show. It's a show that they obviously care about because they put loads of money into the season. This is the best looking Disney Plus show, bar none. It looked amazing this season. But because it is, and the fact that we waited 2.5 years for a new season of it, expected something huge. And I think there's always a fine line between expectations and creating expectations versus letting reality play out. But there's also a certain expectation of expectations from the creators of the show that you should have when you're building something and you know the weight and you know a lot of real world factors that go into criticism of series. It's just the nature of television versus film. And I think back to things that I really enjoyed about this season. Keller and Beck's appearance and the Order 66 stuff, leaving on a nice cliffhanger. It was really cool to continue that from seeing it in Book of Boba Fett and then just hearing about it in season 2 of Mandalorian, but not picking it up at all in this season seems also quite random. Doesn't necessarily mean we should put as much emphasis on it in the priority of storytelling here. The IG-11 stuff I thought worked and is interesting. I like him as the as the Marshal of Navarro now, but that type of cycled character doesn't necessarily feel like it rings as true as the writers seem to think it does. I think it's one of those plot points that feels a bit redundant and more like building off of the iconography of things that worked in previous seasons rather than creating your own. And I think with a lot of the scattered ideas in season 3, for me personally, there's a lot of things that built off of former seasons, of Rebels, of Clone Wars that I think ring true for Star Wars fans that have been following all this stuff. But if Bo-Katan's journey, a lot of it relies on your knowledge of prior Star Wars things, and there's not much weight given to her in moments to where we can just see things on her shoulders and see the burdens that she's carried in the past and really understand them in this iteration of Bo-Katan, and we understand them more from past iterations we've seen. There are just a handful of moments across a lot of short episodes this season where you say, man, if they gave them 10 more minutes of dialogue, 10 minutes of things that don't cost money, just two characters sitting in a room talking, I think that would have added a lot to the season. So, in a lot of ways, this season was very breakneck. In other ways, we didn't get to the narrative until the very end. I would have preferred more Moff Gideon sprinkled throughout the entire season. I think that would have given a stronger backbone to the rest of the season. Overall, I think there are a lot of great ideas here. Star Wars has been a mixed bag of that forever. We can look at ideas and go, man, I wish they did this, but that was a really cool idea. And for me, Mandalorian Season 3 falls into that category. I think it's significantly better than Book of Boba Fett, but I do think it is my least favorite season of The Mandalorian. I would give it a 3.25 out of 5. I think there's a lot of disparate ideas here that unfortunately don't connect. And with that being said, I did like every single episode. I think the closest was episode 6 to not liking. I think that's a bottom 2 or 3 episode for me. Other than that, I think the rest of these rest pretty comfortably in that middle tier of episodes across all 3 seasons. There were just not too many that I flat out loved. I don't think there are too many. Maybe the episode 5 and then episode 7 that could rest in my top 10, but they would be at the bottom of my top 10 personally for me. So those are our thoughts on The Mandalorian Season 3 and the finale of The Mandalorian Season 3. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Of course, for our schedule, we are returning to a possible about 2 video a week schedule. We'll let you know. We're going to end up being a bit more flexible as time moves on, or reinstill a bit of creativity and new ideas into our channel instead of being more review and prediction focused. But of course, we will still be covering all new Star Wars releases. So we do have a very delayed but eventually coming review of Star Wars Cataclysm, the High Republic novel that just came out about 2 weeks ago. We also have our Legends Book Club for Dark Force Rising. We also will be continuing with tier lists across every month. And of course, the live streams will continue every single Friday. So make sure you're joining us for those. We answer questions live and play Jedi Fallen Order, but we are going to be wrapping up Jedi Fallen Order this week. And next week, we'll be getting into Jedi Survivor. So there's a lot of exciting stuff to talk about here in the future with Star Wars video games. That also leads me to our community polls, which will be continuing. Video game bracket will be continuing for the next 2.5 weeks or so. So make sure you're voting and letting your voices heard. Thank you so much for watching and for following us throughout the entirety of The Mandalorian. If you are new and just found us during The Mandalorian, we appreciate your support. Stick around for a lot more fun Star Wars content coming here. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.